Good evening. Welcome to this continuation of the worship service that began on Palm Sunday, Passion Sunday, which continued through our worship yesterday on Maundy Thursday, and which continues through our evening worship here on Good Friday. So just a note about this continuation of worship. You'll see that at the close of worship, there is no benediction or sending. That's because this worship service really doesn't end. It continues into our worship celebrations on Easter Saturday and Easter Sunday, and they are noted on your worship bulletin, so please do take that home with you for the order of service for our Easter celebrations. For tonight's worship service, just a couple of notes. After the cross procession, it says in your bulletin, visit the cross, and this is simply a time for you to come up front and to spend a moment at the cross that will be lying at the front of the chancel steps. There's no direct way to do that. Simply come up as you're moved to come up. You don't have to form a long line. You can simply wait until it looks like there's space and come up and spend time at the cross if you would like to do so, and then just return to your seats following that. After a moment of silence for us just to allow ourselves to be centered and quieted, we'll sing Through the Night of Dark and Sorrow. The hymns that we sing are found in the larger of the red worship books that are in the pew rack in front of you. The hymns are in the back portion of that book, and they are noted in your worship bulletin, so we'll rely on you to simply follow that bulletin through as we sing early in our service a few hymns this evening. We'll invite you to stand for the hymn Through the Night of Dark and Sorrow, and then to sit after that and remain seated then throughout the remainder of the worship service, even as we join in singing a couple of hymns following that. Note that if the weather cooperates a little bit, it will be getting darker and darker, and maybe toward the end of the service quite dark. We will be singing Were You There? The three phrases are printed on your worship bulletin. It may be too dark for you to see that at that time, but just know that a solo voice will start that singing of that hymn. And then whenever you feel moved, simply join in the singing of that hymn, but let a solo voice start us through the first phrase of Were You There? Otherwise, allow this story by Walt Wangren Jr. as he recounts this passion account that we will hear tonight, allow it to become a part of your life. Allow yourself to settle in as a part of this story that we have for us tonight. So now enjoy a moment of just quiet reflection, and then we'll prepare to sing our hymn.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, from the words of my groaning?
O my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest.
Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel.
In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them.
To you they cried, and were saved. In you they trusted, and were not put to shame.
But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads.
Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights.
Yet it was you who took me from the womb. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth, and since my mother bore me, you have been my God.
Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help.
Many bulls encircle me. Strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a raving and roaring lion.
I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast.
My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death.
For dogs are all around me. A company of evildoers encircle me. My hands and my feet have shriveled. I can count all my bones.
They stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots.
But you, O Lord, do not be far away. O my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion, from the horns of the wild oxen. You have rescued me.
I will tell of your name to my brothers and sisters. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you.
You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him. Stand in awe of him, all you offspring of Israel.
For he did not despise or abhor the affliction of the afflicted. He did not hide his face from me, but heard when I cried to him. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will pay before those who fear him.
The poor shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever.
All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations shall worship before him.
For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations.
To him, indeed, shall all who sleep in the earth bow down. Before him shall bow down all who go down to the dust, and I shall live for him.
Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that he has done it.
Jesus rose up, following intense prayer of what was soon to come. His legs trembled under the natural weight of standing, but he was able to make his way back to James and Simon and John. His heart sank into deeper loneliness. Their bodies lay like sacks at the bases of 2 trees. By the slow draw of easy breathing, Jesus knew that they were sleeping, all 3. "What, Simon?" he said to his oblivious disciple. "Couldn't you watch 1 hour with me? The spirit is willing, but the flesh is so weak." Then he saw a small firelight below him at the foot of the Mount of Olives. So he bent to his disciples and shook them one by one awake. "Arise and look," he said. "See, the hour has come. My betrayer is at hand." The smoking torches began to arrive, with soft clashing of armor, scabbards, and swords. Suddenly, from 3 sides at once, soldiers appeared, troops of Herod Antipas's armies and captains of the temple police. In front of them all, Jesus recognized a nervous little figure with torch in hand. It was Judas, mirroring a smile. Judas greeted several of the disciples with false sincerity and then spied Jesus. He made his way toward Jesus. He came close to his teacher, exclaiming, "Hail, Master!" Then he went up on his toes and kissed him. A servant of the high priest called, "Is that our man then?" Judas backed away, saying nothing, staring at Jesus. The servant began to stride forward with a knife and rope. Suddenly, Simon Peter burst forward, bellowing and slashing the air with a short sword, striking the rope and the knife from the servant's hands, and in a wild stroke cut off the man's ear. But Jesus sprang forward and grabbed Simon from behind. Taking the weapon from Simon's hand, he growled, "Put it up. Those who take the sword perish by the sword." Releasing Simon, Jesus took a deep breath and said, "Don't you know that I could ask my Father for 12 legions of angels and he would send them to me?" He reached down and picked up the severed ear of the servant and touched it again to the side of the man's head and healed him. At the same time, he found Judas in the throng and glared at him. With a raw, specific condemnation, he declared, "But I would never ask my Father for such a thing, or else the scriptures would never be fulfilled." Little Judas dropped his torch. It seemed like an involuntary act, yet he left it on the ground. He hesitated, then vanished. The soldiers moved forward in the torchlight and began to bind Jesus' arms.
Personal anguish and disappointing loneliness seemed to crush down upon Jesus in a place that should have offered such comfort. The garden could have been a place of refreshment. It could have been a place where his community gathered around him, supporting him. Instead, it turned into a place of isolation. Even with his disciples so close, Jesus is virtually alone. His place of prayer, a solitary rock, firm and unyielding, was that his image of his Father in this moment? A firm, unyielding presence in his life? And then the betrayal by one of his own. As if the others falling asleep weren't bad enough, now he sees Judas conspiring against him, turning a sign of such love, a kiss, into an act of impending violence. Even then, Jesus says, true to his character, after a wild slash of the sword, someone is hurt. It is not even to be this way. Jesus, ever compassionate, reaches out with a healing touch.
It's hard to imagine the disciples' emotional swing. The Passover meal was somewhat surreal, and now to be in the garden with Jesus looking so distraught, doing everything you can to fend off sleep, but your eyelids are not cooperating. When Judas arrives, you might be thinking that you are now complete again, but the cohort of soldiers quickly changes everything. Now you have gone from sleeping to a rush of adrenaline that makes it hard to control anything. Panic sets in. An initial reaction to fight, but then a stronger reaction of flight. What becomes of Jesus? What becomes of yourself? Everything seems to be engulfed into darkness. The night, your will, your spirit.
Two Roman soldiers drove Jesus forward to the steps of the platform that held Pilate's chair, a large wooden chair called the magistrate's seat. Pilate ascended the steps at the back of the platform and spoke. "Now then, what's the charge?" Caiaphas said, We found this man, Jesus of Nazareth, perverting our nation. Yes, said Pilate. And, said Caiaphas, sedition. He says that he is Messiah, a king. Pilate frowned. Why have you come to me, he said. Your Messiah is your religion. Judge him according to your own law. The governor made motions to stand and go. Caiaphas snapped to attention. No, we must come to you. We don't have authority to put a man to death. Pilate did stand up then. Death, he said. You think he's committed a capital offense? He stepped forward and squinted into Jesus' face, then said, Bring him in. I'll interrogate him inside. In a broad hallway, Pilate sat down with Jesus positioned directly in front of him. I have no time for this. Make your answers short, Pilate said. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus bent forward, raised his head, and looked into Pilate's eyes and responded, Do you say this on your own? Or do others tell you about this, about me? What? Am I a Jew? Pilate sneered. Your own chief priest delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus said, My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my subjects would be fighting for me. But my kingdom does not belong here. So then you are a king? Asked Pilate. You say that I am a king, said Jesus. The reason I was born into the world is to testify to the truth. All those who belong to the truth listen to my voice. Shaking his head, Pilate returned to the crowd, whispering to himself, What is truth? Pilate announced to the crowd that he found no fault in Jesus. The crowd clamored, and certain members of the Sanhedrin lodged a protest, claiming that Jesus stirs up insurrection, is known as a revolutionary, and even forbids his followers to give tribute to Caesar. With each accusation, Pilate looked to Jesus to respond. Jesus offered nothing but silence. Finally, Pilate raised his hands, asking for the crowd's silence. He stepped forward and announced, I examined this man and found no evidence of your charges, but your outrage is real and must be satisfied. Therefore, I will order the accused to be scourged with a whip of knotted cords and weights of metal. And after that, I will honor your custom of releasing one prisoner at the Passover. I will release this man, Jesus of Nazareth. Someone from the crowd yelled out, Don't release Jesus of Nazareth! Release Jesus Barabbas! Quickly, a handful of zealots seized the moment and chanted, Barabbas! Barabbas! Pilate was stunned and yelled out, This man is a murderer! But the crowd grew louder, swelling into a mob, Barabbas! Barabbas! The governor issued the orders to the centurion, Take him to the barracks, whip him. Afterward, Jesus watched several soldiers place on his head a circlet of thorny briars. Then a purple robe was draped over him. His skin was sticky and wet, his back unbendable. This was the Father's will. He barely heard Pilate's words, Behold the man. Pilate shouted, Now what do you say? Which man should I release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus of Nazareth? The multitude had found a single voice. Barabbas! Pilate looked troubled. Then what shall I do with this man? Crucify him, came the thick-throated chorus. Priests and people and zealots and pilgrims, but no distinction among them now. They were the mindless mob. Crucify him! Why should I crucify him? Pilate was crying. What evil has he done? Caiaphas shouted, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God. Pilate was shouting at Jesus, what's the matter with you, man? Have you nothing to say? Caiaphas too was shouting, crucify him, magistrate, or else you are no friend of Caesar's because he pretends to be a king like Caesar. Crucify him! The huge crush of people was wheeling toward riot. Crucify him! What then? Shrieked Pontius Pilate. Shall I crucify your king? Caiaphas turned purple with fury. We have no king but Caesar. And the voice of the multitude resolved itself in an endless, pondering, roarious, crucify! So Pilate sat down in the judgment chair. He delivered his verdict, releasing the murderer. But Jesus of Nazareth, he turned over to the will of the people, ordering a centurion and a few soldiers to lead him outside the city and crucify him.
How many times would Pilate look back on this night, replaying again and again what could or should he have done differently? Will he convince himself that he was powerless, merely a pawn himself in this great play? He felt as trapped as Jesus was himself. Surely he tried to release him, hadn't he? But he had to keep the peace in Jerusalem. The crowd was near riot, after all. What choice did he have? And after all, even Jesus did not seem too interested in his own release. Standing there, silent, like he was above all of this. And his disciples, where were they? They did not seem overly concerned. Yes, Pilate had washed his hands of all of this, and good riddance. He had convinced his mind. Now if only his dreams would catch up.
If Pilate thought he was in turmoil, just imagine the disciples. The scene in the garden seemed almost playful compared to this. They wanted to speak up, to come to Jesus' defense, but that crowd seemed so angry. How could it come to this? Even a simple word of protest on their part, and the crowd would turn on them. No, better to stay silent, just blend in. Maybe a time will come when they can intervene. Jesus had talked about this, had tried to warn them, but nothing could have prepared them for this. He was, after all, a rabbi himself. Shouldn't the religious leaders be on his side? This was just too confusing. Better just to hold back for a time. Thank goodness John was taking care of Jesus' mother. They seemed to be forging some kind of bond.
Jesus is dragging a heavy wooden beam up the center of the street. In fact, 2 soldiers try to lay it on his shoulders, but the weight of the rough wood startled the lacerations in his back, and the pain became so intense that he slipped to the ground in a faint. So now he is cradling one end of the beam under his left arm and bumping its other end over the stones of the street. Out through the garden gate they go and journey north. Wet from the cold drizzle, they come to a hillock by the side of the road, a rocky mound in which 4 stout poles are fixed, forever ready to receive the crossbeams and the bodies of criminals sentenced to crucifixion. The hill allows a public viewing. It is called Golgotha. The centurion halts there and hands Jesus a jar of liquid. He lifts it to his lips, but then refuses to drink. It is wine mixed with myrrh, a narcotic. It is not the will of the Father. 4 soldiers strip Jesus down to his loincloth. At the same time, another group of soldiers arrives. They bring 2 more men with crossbeams on their backs. These men do drink, draining their jars completely dry. All 3 are now stretched out on the ground, each beside a different pole. His arms are yanked left and right as far as they will go, palms up. Jesus hears the thump of a maul on metal. Once, twice. A dull pain pulses up into his armpit and neck. This is the will of the Father. The soldiers drive the 3rd spike into his ankles. As they do so, Jesus whispers, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." A soldier hangs a shingle at the top of the cross. Printed on it in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin by the order of Pilate himself is the legend, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Certain Pharisees are laughing and yelling out, "He saved others. Can he save himself? If you are the Son of God, prove it and set yourself free." Jesus drops his eyes, sees familiar women at his feet, and cries out, "This is sorrow. This is suffering greater than whips and spikes." His mother is there, Mary, still supporting herself with John's arm, is looking directly at him, pleading with him, crying. She is 50 years old, gray and frail, her eyes begging him, "Why are you dying?" "Woman, woman, woman," he murmurs to his mother. He rolls his head toward John. "Here is your son now." To John, Jesus whispers, "And she is your mother. Please take her away. Care for her." He closes his eyes. The clouds continue to grow darker. "Eli?" No, not even his Father, whose will he is even now obeying. The Father who has loved him from the beginning, whom he has called Abba. "Eli? Eli?" Where is his Father now? "My God," he shrieks, "my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus allows his body to droop. The weight of it draws out his arms, closing the cage around his lungs, constricting his breathing. He whispers, "I'm thirsty." Someone offers him wine on a sponge connected to a long stick. "It is finished," Jesus gasps. "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." His body falls forward. His head sinks down. His heavy black hair, his long, wet hair falls over his head like a curtain. An everlasting sigh issues from his open mouth. And that is the end. Jesus dies.